These are your superpowers, positive character strengths. You have them, all of them, some more than others.
What we are best suited to do in our lives connects with who we are and our character strengths.
Standing up strong, activating your superpowers is how you can change the world.
And you're pioneering the future of humanity.
Let's start right now.
Welcome to the Upstander Ripple Effect. I'm Jake Campbell, and I lead Upstander training at the Nancy and David Wolf Holocaust and Humanity Center. We're thrilled to have a guest in the studio with us for this episode. Her name is Stacy Sims, and she is the executive director and founder of The Well. Their mission is to improve people's well-being, mental and emotional health. We're going to get some help from her today to understand why mindfulness is so important and how we can create more mindful moment in our daily lives. Stacy, welcome.
I'm excited to be here.
Oh, I'm excited to have you here, Stacy. So I guess first I'd love to hear about you, what your story is and how you got involved in this incredible work.
Thank you so much for asking. So I always have to take a deep breath and pause here because I'm like, how do I synthesize the life journey of the lived experience? So basically, had lots of natural skills gifted to me in terms of mental, physical agility, a lot of great opportunities as a human being. And despite those things, I ended up in my late 30s on the run from lots of bad habits and lots of responsibility for kind of emotional chaos. And to make that more succinct, by the time I was in my late 30s, I was a daily drinker, suffering from panic disorder because I was so not mindful. And ultimately, my whole nervous system was in chaos. So I finally got sober, went to a 12-step program and started Pilates in about the same week. And so those two things live together in my mind. So the 12-step work was a way to be able to sort of sit with one's own positive strengths and character deficits and be able to shed equal light on them. And also listen to people tell stories about resilience, ultimately. And the Pilates is really, to me, it's mindfulness in motion. Okay. It's moving all the limbs, coordinating the spine, very breath focused. So it allowed me to come back into cohesion. Those two things then allowed me to get out of the very narcissistic state of being dysregulated. And ultimately, it was almost like someone took the blinders off and I was like, oh my gosh, other people. And I became very, very interested in the real life challenges that many of us have. We're trying to feel better, but a lot of the tools we're given to feel better actually don't work in a generative way. But when you can find the magic to step into a space of cohesion, the whole world gets more luminous. And that's really what I've been dedicating myself to, is how do you figure out what's the secret sauce for helping humans re-regulate in a very dysregulated world? And how do the nonprofit I work with and for, we try to create tools so that mindfulness shows up where people learn, work, and live. So it isn't another thing to put on your to-do list that you have to do all by yourself. That was a very long answer.
It wasn't a long answer at all. It was an incredible answer, and it's got me thinking about so many different things. But I think just getting started with this idea of bringing mindfulness to your work and to the world and helping it so that people can be regulated rather than dysregulated. I would love if you could tell me why you think mindfulness is so important, and also how do we get to living mindfully?
Thank you. So I didn't really encounter mindfulness let me say it this way. I think we are all collectively have encountered mindfulness, hopefully sometime in our life. But I didn't understand it as a codified practice until maybe 10 years ago. But what Pilates, yoga, Reiki, all of those things that I was doing is they started to basically have as a part of them an awareness of basically how your breath is moving in your body, very focused ways of thinking, how you're moving energy, meditation practices. And what I discovered is that even before I was on digital devices all the time, like all of us are, that whether it's the world we live in or a little bit of my basic constitution, that in order for me to get at like a cohesive baseline, to be able, and by cohesive baseline, what I mean is that I understand that we're going to have difficulties. I understand that we might have injuries, we might have illnesses. But I do think that humans are uniquely capable of rising to the occasion and overcoming, so long as we don't start to perseverate and get stuck. So I think in today's world, you really have to have a mindfulness practice to counterbalance just the noise off of our digital devices, which by their very nature are driving us to the base of our brainstem, which is fight, flight, freeze. That's the technology that is in there, so we stay and we profit someone else. So what mindfulness means to me, I understood movement and breath. I understood meditation. But then when I started to really deepen my understanding of what I think in today's world mindfulness is essentially having enough practices so that you're able to be focused on the present moment and all the aspects, all the sensory aspects of the present moment. I was looking at this glass of water. So rather than just going to chug it, it's just even a sense of like, oh my gosh, it's so nice and cold. I can feel how the water is condensing on the outside of the glass, thinking of the nourishment. That is a mindful moment. You can do a mindful walk in nature. We can have a mindful conversation, which we are because we're really attuned to each other with something between us, which is the topic of mindfulness. You can do mindful eating. Our programs include mindful music moments, mindful poetry moments, using centering prompts to listen to music, centering prompts to listen to poems. But for my money, I think you really need a meditation practice. We need to have time and focus on just our interior responses to the world. And for me, that's the place where I discover strengths as well as thought habits, pettiness habits, where you really come to encounter the beauty and the silliness of your mind.
I love so much of that. And I want to talk a little bit about strengths in this idea of being present, in this idea of finding a mindfulness practice such as meditation. For us, strengths are a tool by which we can be our best selves, and also appreciate how the our survivors and upstanders in our community harnessed their best selves against incredible odds, right? How do you use strengths in your mindful practices at the Well?
So what we really try to do is hold space for individuals. What we feel as though is that if we place or invite humans into a mindfulness practice, they're going to naturally be able to unpack the way they think, feel, etc. So it's creating the conditions to be able to discover and amplify what's within. as the adult facilitators, what we're often doing is help provide different language to help strengthen and fortify, especially a young person's understanding of who they are. Everything's become so binary, and especially for young people, it's the equivalent of if there's an uncomfortable feeling, especially socially, the impulse is to just go no, swipe. Very good, bad, right, wrong, perform, sleep, not a lot in between. So we get to use strengths as sort of like the child who won't quit talking to be able to say, oh my gosh, I love your curiosity. And I'm so excited about how much you want to know. And I'm eager to figure out if we can find a way to be better listeners and stay curious. So how do you begin to help? And a self-practice, what we say to adults who we are training to do this work is that wherever we have our deficits, that's where we will be deficit in relationship. So really having a deep and abiding curiosity about one's own strengths and also the things, everything we do to feel better. So whatever things that are within us that we are not quite happy with, having gentleness about it, but being able to shift versus just sort of spinning around that thing you don't like. So strengths are a way to language and create new revere language, revere ideas, as well as to categorize actions in the positive.
I love that idea so much. It's almost like it's reframing the negative to move forward with the positive, but also it's giving language to the search for balance. All right.
Yeah, for sure. Because every cell in our body right now is working on creating some sort of ecosystem balance. And so our thoughts impact the cells, our cells impact our thoughts. And our framework is kind of holding almost like a globe around us that can either be expansive or can be, make us feel safe and grounded, or it can feel like someone just shook up the snow globe. I met a woman recently who's only 2 years in the U.S. after coming to leave the Congo from conflict and then being in a refugee camp for 17 years. Her faith is everything. And I can imagine sometimes with kind of our trauma-informed world or these ideas of like really kind of trying to dig into stuff or whatever, I feel like sometimes you just listen to what is the strength of a human being and know that for them, that is the anchor in the moment. We don't need to dismantle it. If we celebrate it and then create broader experiences around it, I think that humans will naturally fill into other character strengths and other anchors.
Yeah, I was about to say, that's exactly what it was for me when you were describing it. It sounds like spirituality was for this woman, the anchor that allowed her to persevere and tow up her resilience. And especially when thinking of people's trauma-informed worlds, one of the things that I've always loved about strengths is how part of the inclusion criteria for including a strength as a strength was that when you see somebody perform them, it doesn't make you jealous. It's meant to fill you with admiration.
Yeah, and a lot of times we're like, oh, wait, that's someone who means what they say what they mean. They're moving into right action. And that's like poetry in motion. It's like dance. And I think collectively whether we're thinking of politics or we're looking for people who walk the talk. The other thing I think we talked about this the last time I got to see you, the book The Anxious Generation, which is a beautiful read for anybody who cares about mental health. But we've also moved away from a monoculture, probably for many good reasons in some respects. But we have these little disparate cultures that come in these little TikTok bundles or wherever. And I think that the language of strengths creates enough of a monoculture so that it's not biased towards any one culture. It comes out of, as you know, a vast study of what cross-culturally are the things that lift up humanity. And if we can all get around those ideas collectively, then we're centering the same thing. And as you said, it's aspirational, but it's just like watching a mentor.
Mm-hmm.
And then if you're studying strengths, it allows you to kind of push the clutter aside and be able to be more in action as well as receiving of other people's gifts. And that's a community in harmony.
Let's talk about harmony, because I think that is so central to this conversation of strengths and mindfulness. And a lot of what you've been talking about as well, I've heard little snippets of it. We've talked about it outside of this, and it's definitely coming up right now, is this idea of technology as an obstacle towards harmony. I would love if you could speak on that, because you're so insightful with it, and also any other obstacles you can think about us being mindful, being present, finding balance, finding harmony.
Thank you. Yeah, there's a lot of the book, The Anxious Generation, and a lot of research that's coming out now is just making it not just correlative, but causal, that the technology, in particular social media, and is essentially driving us to the base of the brain by design. So the folks in Silicon Valley spend a lot of money and time understanding what motivates human behavior. And what motivates human behavior, basically to stay online, is anything that feels like survival. Mm-hmm. So essentially, when we're on there, with the endless scroll, with just looking at 55 tiny little tidbits of information, it's jacking up the nervous system. So it's all sympathetic nervous system arousal that feels like zoning out. But imagine it's like the fight or flight part of our nervous system, the alert. There is an entire generation who's never not had that. There's never been the parasympathetic rest, digest, and integrate. If you're online 60, 70, 80 hours a week, it's just like having chaos or a lion right here. And so it is incredibly toxic. And they're starting, the Surgeon General, lots of individuals are leaning into limiting social media to better would be 16, but at least 13. Because it's the youth mental health crisis is extraordinary, and it's not going to get any better. I feel like adults, and I'm kind of the same way because it's so addicting. And as an addict, I'm very aware of how we can convince ourselves that, well, everybody's doing it. But this is really a moment where we have to, all of the polarization that we feel, the speed with which everything is happening, I think we really have to take a look at this. This is going to be like the smoking, and understand that it is impacting our public health, and brain health also affects physical health and emotional health. I work with a lot of teens, and I'm seeing out of 12 teens, half of them with Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, POTS syndrome, mobility aids, young people with incredible complex pain syndromes. That's not sustainable. So, and if we don't have practices, which doesn't have to be meditation, but my guess is you can find something that you like that you'll do. But if we don't have practices that allow us to be sort of old school, out in nature, walking around, reading books, playing games, if we don't have those practices, we're just going to keep buying the narrative that the technology is selling us. So one thing, I've heard this quote twice from the guy, Asa, who invented the endless scroll. He's modified it, but it's still very impactful. He created the endless scroll. The endless scroll wastes the equivalent of 100,000 human lifetimes a month.
My goodness.
So just from human capital, think about all the lost character strengths. That's insane.
It's just such a loss from not being present. Not just not being present, right? But actively finding a non-productive escapism to escape the present. And I'm looking at you right now, and for those that are listening in on the podcast rather than watching our YouTube, I can see your badge softly, right? And it like is so antithetical to that idea of trying to soften the noise, because when we are constantly scrolling, we're just bringing up more and more noise, making the noise louder and louder. And I love these tools that you gave that, yes, we've got Pilates, yes, we've got Reiki, yes, we've got meditation. Even just reading or walking can soften the noise.
Yeah. And also, I think that when you soften, you're going to find out more dimensions of yourself and be able to start to kind of piece apart the narrative that we do as we grow. We try to make sense of things. We're like, oh, I'm this way, they're that way. So softening allows you to get more dimension on those thoughts. But it also, I think, will have us understand when we need to fire up and take action. And I think that's the other piece of it, the upstander piece. It's like we can sit online and be enraged, but I'm pretty sure that tagging some folks is not what is being asked of me as a human. If it could be, but my guess is my body, my presence, some aspect of myself wants to be moved out into the world to be useful. So we need both the softness and the fire.
I love that. The softness and the fire to move us towards action.
Yes.
To be upstanders. Now, that would in itself, I think, be a fantastic place to end. But I do have one more question for you.
Yeah.
And that is, what do you think is most important? What do you think is most important to find harmony, to find balance, to be mindful and present?
Well, I'll say this. I think this comes out of my understanding of being a recovering alcoholic. I feel like if there's the thing that you don't want to deal with, but you probably should deal with, do that first. As long as I was not dealing with alcoholism, everything else was sort of folly. And in today's world, it might literally be trying to limit the amount of time you're online. But sort of go for the big thing. Don't ignore it. I would say second, if you think of the practices, it doesn't even have to be yoga, but if you just took a day or a couple days and you truly did an inventory of how many hours you're online, how many hours, like what did you do that was actually nourishing, like old school nourishing, like when you feel your best, like I laughed with my friend, we all went out, we went a walk in the park, like how much are you actually doing that? And I think that if you start placing more of those nourishing activities in, then you're going to find your way toward more ease.
I love that so much. And, I was just thinking about how much just being in nature makes me admire the world, how much reading makes me admire the world. And so this is, I think, what I'm going to leave with the most about is how can I do more that is nourishing my life in the same way as just speaking to you today has 100% nourished my life. And I'm sure that is something that a lot of people say to you. Thank you so much, Stacy.
Oh, thank you, Jake.
This has been so insightful and so nourishing for my life.
Ditto. Thank you.
Our thanks to the Mayerson Family Foundation and the VIA Institute on Character for supporting this series. We have a link in the show notes so you can take your own free character strengths survey and learn more about your strengths. We'd love to hear about your experiences with character strengths and how you're using them to stand up. You can reach us anytime by email, and you can listen anytime on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or visit holocaustandhumanity.org/podcast. You can also connect with us on Instagram and TikTok at Holocaust and Humanity, and X and Facebook at CincyHHC. The Upstander Ripple Effect is a production of the Nancy and David Wolf Holocaust and Humanity Center. This series is part of the Cynthia and Harold Gutman Family Center for Storytelling. Visit us in person at historic Union Terminal in Cincinnati, Ohio, or online at holocaustandhumanity.org. Managing producer is Ann Thompson. Consulting producer is Joyce Kamen. Technical producer is Robert Mills. Technical director is Josh Emerson. Opening sequence is by Ken Furman. Select music is by Kik Lee. And this is recorded at Technical Consulting Partner Studios in Cincinnati, Ohio.